Welcome to the west coast of Australia, 2134, a country that has been ravaged by World War III and rebuilt on corruption. The rich live big, enjoying the view from the top while the rest of us fight to scrape out a living. The only hope many of us have is to con or carve our way up the ladder. Fortune favours the bold, after all. And to add to the chaos, advanced body tech, body augmentations and cybernetics have changed society forever and led to huge rises in crime and violence. And so the hunters have been established, a halfway point between federal police and bounty hunters. The hunters work outside the law and put their lives on the line for their country, for their gods, and for money. In these cities, you do what you can to stay alive. It's all you can do. One bomb down, 2 to go, and this fighter was between me and the second exploding case. The carriage was a carbon copy of the last one, down to the bound and subdued passengers. The woman in front of me was clearly a half-orc. She had the light green tint to her skin, a mohawk, and small tusks protruding from her lower jaw. I tried to invade her system, but unexpectedly her firewalls were impeccable. I didn't have time to pull them apart. Terek. I knew a little orcish, enough to put that together as a threat or some kind of an insult. Someone was keen on their ancestry. Her cybernetic arms shot forward at phenomenal speed, pistons, biosteel, and a body of nanofibers. These were professional level fighter mods. But as they weren't technically a weapon, still perfectly operational. I couldn't even engage my punch dagger. The security programs were against me now. I backed up, popping the shields from my arms. At least defensive tech was still operable. Her blows skidded off them and they gave me space to breathe. I tried a few exploratory strikes of my own, but I wasn't fast enough with my shields out. If I was going to hit anything, I'd have to drop the defenses and risk it. I pulled the shields back in between blows. It was lucky timing, her incoming punch not making contact where she'd expected it. Her footing off balance for a second, I took my chance and threw out a push kick. It landed, and the satisfying feeling of her knee dislocating and hyperextending in the opposite direction was short-lived. She smiled again. I felt it push back. The distinctive sound of metal joints in her legs resetting into the correct positions. Fuck me, that was not good. Her motion blurred for a moment, then she looked confused. She was trying to initiate a Hermes, a god's damn speed-enhancing unit. Probably pro-athlete grade tech as well, if it matched her arms. It did nothing for her. Even that had been disabled. She didn't need it though. I was already in enough trouble. I redoubled my efforts and pushed back against her, throwing punches as fast as I could, with less emphasis on accuracy as speed. She backstepped, letting me gain ground, blocking my punches like it was nothing. I wasn't under any illusions of actually getting the upper hand though. She was just letting me wear myself out. I only needed to land one blow though. I just needed a hold. One punch made it past her guard and I splayed my hand to grab her face like I had back in the carriage with Eric. She brushed my hand aside, not really understanding what I was attempting. Then she came back swinging. Strikes that were so efficient, so precise. I had to admire her even though she was kicking my ass. I wasn't going to let her have it all her own way though. This was gonna hurt. I left an opening, not so big as to be obvious, but big enough to be tempting. She took the bait and funneled all her power into the punch. I caught her arm and let it hit my chest. The punch so hard I felt it through my subdermal armor, taking the wind out of me. I latched onto her arm. She moved with it, ever the pro, and swept my leg. We both went down, her on top of me, her arm tight in my grasp. The next punch was to the side of my head, and I raised my free arm to block it. No time to deploy my shield. I saw stars. Another blow, and another. I could taste blood. She grabbed me by the wrist and wrenched my arm aside and brought her forehead down on my face. God's damn, that headbutt was like a cobblestone. I almost blacked out. When I opened my eyes, vision blurry, she repeated herself. I dropped my hold on her arm. She let go of mine and rained punches down on my head. I went limp in her arms, on the brink of unconsciousness. I felt her pause, wary in case I was faking it. I summoned my last ounce of strength, one last-ditch effort before she switched me off for good. My eyes shot open and my hands spread wide, speeding at her face. Her fist came in like a comet. I wasn't sure I was going to survive that. But I guess I'm tougher than I give myself credit. The half-orc pushed me ahead of her, my hands bound behind my back with a cheap pair of cuffs. The built-in wireless blockers stopped me from doing any regular hacking tricks on anyone or anything. The fighter's hand on my shoulder guided me. Blood ran from my nose and ears. She had the wand tight in her grip in her free hand. The third car from the back had all its passengers subdued like the last two. The one we had come from just had the green machine in it, most of the passengers being restrained. She was clearly up to the task of going solo. The civilians in this one were much the same, cowering, praying for their lives, like it would do them any good. The tableau ahead of me was disappointing to say the least. Hercule and Eric sat on their knees, hands tied, guns pointed at their backs. A couple of gangers held classic pump-action shotguns, something old that couldn't fail. All up, 4 very unhappy-looking figures stood behind the 2 prisoners. 2 rather bloody half-orcs with the to-be-expected sleeveless denim jackets to match, one elf missing an eye and looking twitchy. The one in the middle, a human as far as I could tell, oozed confidence and arrogance. "Hey," I said to Hercule, spitting blood as I talked. "How did you go then?" Hercule asked sarcastically. I shrugged as I was jostled by the boxer behind me. "I got farther than I thought I would." She halted me just short of the others and forced me to my knees, stepping around me to stand at my side, hand never leaving my shoulder, keeping pressure down on me. The human's face split into a grin and he raised a cigar to his lips, took a long drag and blew out a smoke ring. "Mr. Conductor?" I asked with a smirk. He nodded. "You have given us quite the runaround," he said, taking another puff. I hate guys like that. They savor the fear, the power, the weight between the capture and the kill. He was the kind of guy who would pull your fingernails off because there was nothing good on TV. My captor looked down at me, then back up at her boss. "He had this," she said, holding out the wand. "Excellent." He even clapped slow and dramatic. "Good job, Reva," he said, stepping past the other 2 prisoners and walking forward holding out his hand. "You and me will be getting a good bonus for this." He held out his hand for the wand. She didn't hand it over. He frowned. "I'll make sure you get your cut," he insisted, reaching out further. She lifted the wand slightly, adjusting her grip. He took one more slow step closer. "Reva," like he was questioning a child. She turned and looked down at me, blinked slowly and looked back up at the conductor. Confused, he went to snatch the wand from her hand. Then all hell broke loose. Reva pressed the 2 corresponding runes on the wand and a telekinetic blast lifted the smug son of a bitch off his feet, flipping him head over heels and slamming him into the roof of the carriage. Shotguns came up. I threw myself sideways, breaking contact with the half-orc. Reva fainted and the wand tumbled from her hand, rolling under the nearest seats. A trance was not a hard thing to hold, but after contact was broken, the victim always passed out. Not that it was a bad thing, but it would have been nice to have her keep throwing hands on my side of the fence for a bit. Pieces of the seats exploded around me as shotgun spray got closer with every trigger pull. I lifted my sword hilt from my belt, the cuffs holding my wrist together only being dummy locked. Damn, how many rounds did those shotties have? Finally, a pause in the fire as the dumbasses both reloaded at the same time, no one providing cover fire. I came around the side of the seats, a growl building in my throat that became a scream, my sword fully extended. The half-elf with the missing eye came flying over the seats ahead of me, vaulting them like an athlete. He had found an alternative to cybernetics as well, a pair of punch daggers, almost 12 inches long and razor sharp. The bastard was fast too, I'd give him that. He flashed the blades back and forth. His fighting style was flashy though. He liked to look good whilst he was kicking ass, but it showed. Spins, kicks, and other showy shit. I would have rolled my eyes if he wasn't so quick. Most of the strikes he was throwing out were thrusts, the daggers being of that nature. But he was somewhat practical, throwing in elbow strikes and knees when he got close enough. He was good, but he was hurting. So was I, to tell the truth. It was all I could do not to get skewered. Hercule had taken a good portion of his vision though when he had taken his eye, and he hadn't been able to adapt yet. I swapped my sword to my left hand, deployed my right shield and assaulted his blind side, going hard on the offensive. I blocked most of the strikes. He took a slash at my leg, just the right spot to jam my knee joint. My leg seized up and I was stuck on the spot. There was no way he could keep up. His head tilted back and forth as he tried in vain to watch all my movements. All it took was one move too slow, one block in the wrong place. Blocking one strike with my offhand and getting my sword inside his guard, I brought my blade across his throat in one short slash. My leg came back into action and I stepped back as I made the strike, giving myself room to move. His body turning on the side with the action of the strike as I cut halfway into his neck. The sound of shotguns suddenly firing off met my ears as they realized their buddy was dead. I grabbed the dead elf before he fell and I pulled him close, using him as a shield. They had no compunctions about unloading into their now very deceased comrade. I dropped the dead man as I backed into cover behind a row of seats. I started to scan the shooters, looking for options. Their boss was still down, unconscious. I considered burning him while he was out cold, but I was already running on fumes, and my energy was better spent elsewhere. The cuffs restraining Hercule and Eric were the same as mine, remote magnetic locks. They took a blink to unlock. The orcs only. Eric was bagged for me. I wasn't going to let that go. The big guy knew as soon as I had disengaged the locks. He didn't scream as he threw off his restraints. He didn't need to. The gunmen did it for him. He moved smooth and silent for a guy so big. They didn't hear a thing. I poked my head around the edge of the destroyed seat. He had gotten to his feet behind the one who had been holding the gun to his head, now standing in front of him. Then he grabbed his arms, lifted him off the ground, the shooter looking like a dedication to crucifixion as he cried out in pain. Then Hercule began to tear his goddamned arms off. His buddy fumbled his reload, the shotgun shells tumbled to the ground. He lost his nerve seeing the fate of the only other person with a gun. He dropped his shotty and ran for it. There was all the telltale sounds of tearing fibers, as Hercule ripped one arm from the socket, the other hanging half-connected. He let the victim writhe on the floor for a moment until he curb-stomped him into oblivion. "Wanker!" he spat. "Talk about a disarm," I called from behind the seats. "I'm not usually that way inclined," he said, rubbing his wrist, "but he really pissed me off." I spat out some blood and got to my feet. Good to know. I turned away from him and began to scan the area for the bomb. I knew it was here somewhere. "If you want something done right," the conductor screamed, getting to his feet, "kill the fucking gnome first." I spun around just in time to see him fire a shot into the back of Eric's head. His terrified face exploded before I could even flinch. Hercule moved quickly, but not quick enough, the barrel of the revolver coming round level with his chest. It was an old-fashioned, big-bore Smith & Wesson, reliable and ruthless. The shot caught Hercule at short range. He stumbled back, his clothes torn apart. Blood stained what was left of the ragged cloth. I knew it was a bad idea before the conductor did. Hercule roared and charged the gang leader, who unwisely fired a second time. It hardly even slowed him down. The massive orc slammed into him, brought his forehead down in a vicious headbutt and ripped the gun and his hand from the end of his arm. My vision was still tuned to electric impulses, my other sight. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I was looking for. Hercule grabbed the conductor and slammed him against the window, shattering it. Glass was scattered around the carriage and the passengers as the howl of the wind, moving at hundreds of kilometers an hour, blew in. "I'm wondering," Hercule yelled over the wind. "You shot me. What was the next step in your master plan?" "This." The conductor held up a detonator switch in his remaining hand and pressed the button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again and then looked in my direction. I held up the bomb in my hand, my powers blocking the signal, a grin on my face. "Catch." I tossed the bomb to Hercule, who caught it, pressed it into the man's arms, who instinctively grabbed it, and then he threw him out the window. Not a second or two had passed before I sent a signal down the diminishing line of connection. There was a huge explosion behind us somewhere on the track, and the train rocked. Hercule fell backwards, his massive bulk shaking the floor as he met it. Good one, he chuckled as he passed out. I stood on the station platform in Perth city centre, Hercule on a gurney beside me. He'd been stabilised and was conscious now, but he was on a lot of meds and painkillers. You okay? I asked as I turned the wand over in my hands. He shrugged. Believe it or not, I've had worse. I didn't choose to upgrade these, he said, giving his cybernetic arms a shake. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. I passed him the wand. This might not be in the same condition it left Merlin Tech in. Really? Damaged in the fight, and all that, I said casually. He nodded. Tech like that, it's not right. That's not for me to decide, he groaned. I just do my job. I know, but for the record, as it were. He nodded, understanding. Two paramedics approached, flanked by two of the local police officers. Both were in uniform. One on the left took his hat off. He was sporting a short blonde beard, scruffy curly hair. He reached up to pat it smooth. Officer Reich, I said with a mock salute. Leslie Reich, solid cop, and all round too damn smooth and smart for his own good sometimes. He had the kind of rugged charm that women seemed to gravitate to. Or maybe it was the uniform. Lucky bastard. He was one of the few local cops I actually respected and got along with. Ulf, Mr. Mason. He nodded to Hercule. A moment of your time before you're taken away, he asked Hercule, then looked at me. We both shrugged. You said there was a half-orc female on board too. Yeah, got a punch on her like a truck, I said. Why, what's up? She's the only one we can't account for. She had been there when I left the carriage, bound and unconscious. I shrugged. She was just an enforcer. The boss exploded somewhere about an hour eastward. He's probably the main one you want. Yeah, I heard about that part, he said, looking annoyed. He didn't like it when hunters killed suspects. It irked him almost as much as losing evidence. His eyes fell on the wand, and he looked back up. We've sent drones out to confirm. Officer, Hercule spoke up. I'd like to be patched up and on my way back, if that's okay. I have people to report to. Leslie signalled to the two med team members who took up positions either side of the gurney. Hercule held out a hand for me to shake. Take care of yourself, Ulf. I'll see you get your cut for this, seeing as you lost your mark. I smiled weakly. And because I saved you, big green ass. Yeah, that too, he laughed. I appreciate it. They wheeled him away. Safe trip, Hunter, Leslie called over his shoulder. Leslie's partner moved away some distance to take a call, leaving us alone on the open platform. Leslie waited until everyone was out of earshot before speaking. I can't argue with your results, but man, he shook his head. That was some serious carnage in there. Sorry? I started to apologise. Did you know there was a toasty corpse in the front carriage? Again, I tried to speak and he cut me off. Poor sod was trying to put out the flames with toilet water. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Leslie looked shocked. Sorry, I said, getting myself under control, but that fucker tried to snipe me on top of the train. You were on top of the train? He asked, unbelieving. At 300 kilometres an hour. Trade secret, I said. He stared in disbelief. But I wasn't giving up all my tricks, even to him. I'll tell you over a drink sometime. He shook his head and replaced his hat, giving me a lazy salute. Take care of yourself, Wolf. We'll grab a beer soon. Sounds good. He strode away, casually confident. Bloody poster boy, I laughed under my breath. A good week passed. It was a good week. I had time to rest and heal. I was out getting noodles, sushi, stir-fry, and a curry. Fear was one for variety, when a message popped up on my heads-up display. It had no automated ID, but I knew straight away who it was from. Thanks for the assist. Enjoy the bonus. I logged onto my banking to check the account. Lo and behold, I was 30k richer. Well, damn. If that was what Merlin Tech paid, maybe I should take private jobs more often. I was engrossed in scrolling through the news, looking for anything involving the train incident on Merlin Tech, making my slow way back to the apartment I shared with my sister. I turned right down the alley that was known as London Court. It used to be a bit of a tourist attraction back in the day. It kinda still was. The vibe had shifted more to the corny medieval side of things. I didn't mind it. There was always a crowd here during the day, but our apartment block was cheap because it was mainly for the retailers, and we had a good view. I bumped into people and got jostled, not really paying attention to anyone until I heard a familiar voice. Hey! It snapped me out of my reading and I refocused on the real world. Officer Reich was standing at the door to my apartment block, leaning on a bare brick wall, looking tired. I assumed he had just come off of a long night shift, but still somehow managed to look like a single mum's dream date. Les, what's up? He was still in uniform, buttons undone, sleeves rolled up. He'd come straight from work. I got something for you. I scanned my keycard as I drew level with him in the door. I looked at him suspiciously. The reinforced steel security door slid sideways, opening up the foyer of the building. It was well kept by city standards. Almost. Paint was only slightly peeling on the walls, most of the rubbish in the bin in the corner, and 80% of the lights working. One flickered on and off to its own rhythm. After you, I motioned for him to go ahead of me. He walked in and held his hand over the sensor for the door as I struggled through with my bags of food. He stepped towards the elevator and I started walking up the stairs. He paused and followed. Lift still busted? He asked. A month now, I said, starting to piss me off. We reached my door. I awkwardly swiped my card over the door plate and it opened. Our apartment was big for the area, but not where you'd expect it. The main living area and the makeshift office was tight, mainly due to all the computers and tech scattered around. Dining and kitchen was what you'd expect. My room wasn't too big either, as it wasn't like I was home half the time. Fia, though, had a huge master suite. It was barely visible through her door, though the steel-plated walls opposite the opening showed signs of claw marks and dents. Les pointedly didn't look in that direction. The main room opened onto a balcony via a wide set of sliding doors. It was as wide as the main space with a great view. It also had drop-down electrified security bars, for obvious reasons. Fia sat hunched on the floor in front of 3 screens, old-style over-ear headphones on and bobbing to some beat only she could hear. She was skinny, though she hid it well with baggy clothes. Short brown hair that wouldn't have looked out of place in an army barracks, and of course the tattoos that helped her control her lycanthropy scrawled across her body. They poked out from the neck of her shirt and the ends of her sleeves. I stepped past her and gave her a nudge with the toe of my boot. What? She trailed off and caught sight of Les. Oh, hi Les. She smiled shyly. I rolled my eyes. He smiled back and gave her a wave. Hey, kid. He'd called her kid for the last 6 years, despite the fact that she was actually older than him. Our half-elf heritage helped her look about 18 years old, and most people forgot how old she really was. Want to join us? She asked. She got up without waiting for an answer, and completely out of character cleaned off the table and laid out some plates. I raised an eyebrow and whispered as I walked past her, Suck up. She poked out her tongue and set out the food. I sat down with Les while she served up food. She took what most people would think as a ridiculously large serve for herself. But werewolves, even in human form, burn through calories like you wouldn't believe. She ate like a bull orc. So, what's up? I asked again. There's a job I think you can help with. I took a bite out of some sushi and spoke around a mouthful. Nothing's been flagged for me. He shook his head and pulled out an NFC card, handing it over. I put it in my palm and let the data transfer. My CO doesn't think we need help. He says we don't need unchained dogs loose on this one. His words, not mine. Fia snarled. I'll give him unchained, she said, taking a mouthful of curry. I pulled up the files and began to scan them. Screw him, Les swore. We need a professional hunter. Our boys are good at their jobs, but they're out of their league. They just don't want to admit it. The file was a series of murders, over the last few months by the looks of it. I scrolled them back and forth, looking at the names and places, the footnotes in each investigation. Each one said cause of death, to be determined. I frowned and opened a file at random. There was a lot about the victim, showing no signs of trauma, no physical marks, no signs of a heart attack or brain hemorrhage. Nothing in the way of cyberware failure either. How do you know these were murders? Apart from the absence of evidence whatsoever, there's nothing to show foul play. You agree then? The lack of anything at all. It isn't right. I looked over the coroner's report on the different cases. Same. It's odd, I'll give you that. I wasn't sure if I should bring it to you until today. You might be messy, but you get results. Messy? I asked in mock indignation. He shrugged. I calls 'em like I sees 'em. He motioned with his fork to keep scrolling and spoke around a mouthful. Bottom file. I opened it. It was surveillance footage, an alley behind a bar, nondescript trash everywhere, and red neon light over the emergency exit. The door opened and a man and a woman stumbled out. She tossed her head back and laughed. He kept his head low and kissed her neck, then pushed her up against a wall, his back to the camera. At first she seemed to be enjoying herself. Then she froze, her eyes wide and her mouth open in a soundless scream. His face was level with her, his hands either side of her head. They stayed like that for almost 3 minutes. Then he removed his hands and her lifeless body dropped to the ground. It felt like rigor mortis had already set in. The stranger turned, head lowered. He paused, then looked up at the security camera, like he had suddenly become aware of it. His face was gone. Not blurred, not covered. It was gone, like a black hole had opened up in the front of his head. The vid glitched, not the whole image, just his body. It shuddered, and it was gone. I skipped back and looked at the time on the screen. It hadn't jumped forward, it hadn't been cut or edited as far as I could see. It was like he just vanished. I glanced at Les. He grimaced. Odd, right? I saved the files. I'll take it. Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. Script and narration by J.J. Brandis. Music was provided by Kayor McLeish. Copyright J.J. Brandis 2024.